Are you there, book break? It's me, Emma. In honor of the new film of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, I wanted to make a video talking about why this book is still so important to so many people more than 50 years after it was first published. And we do have a gorgeous new movie tie-in edition here to go with the film. And I have also dressed like Margaret for this occasion. I borrowed this outfit straight out of the movie trailer. If I was going to really commit to the bit, I should have worn loafers with no socks today, which is very, very important in the book. If you've read it, you'll know, but I don't want to get blisters. So Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume came out in 1970, and by the time I first read it in my school library in the 90s, it was already a classic, and I absolutely loved it. And I read it again and again through the years, and it meant something slightly different at each point of my life that I read it. The most recent time that I read it being a few nights ago in my 30s, and honestly I loved it just as much as I did that first time. And I'm so excited to see the film, which is starring Rachel McAdams and Kathy Bates and looks just absolutely brilliant. So much nostalgia. And I'm not the only one who adores this book. It is referenced in so much pop culture, from The Simpsons to South Park to Ted Lasso. Everyone loves this book. Judy Blume is the author of a lot of books, a lot of very beloved books, particularly for younger readers of different ages. She's got books aimed at 11-year-olds like Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. She's got books about teenagers. She's got books for adult readers, and all of her work is so beloved. But for me, it is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret that I think was the first Judy Blume book I ever read, and which stuck with me so particularly. The second I picked up the other night for the millionth time, it all came rushing back straight away. This book just totally immerses you in the feeling of being an 11-year-old girl and all of the mortification that comes with it. Right within the first few pages, we are reintroduced to the embarrassment of not having started growing boobs yet, or the embarrassment of having started too early. All of the things that occupy your mind, wondering when you're going to need to start wearing deodorant. Are you the only one in your class who hasn't kissed a boy yet? And the stress of making sure you are wearing the right things. A recurring theme in this book is Margaret is the new girl at school, and she is told in no uncertain terms by her friendly neighbour Nancy that she must wear loafers to school with no socks. If she wears socks, everyone's going to think that she's a baby. In fact, she shows up on her first day and half the girls are wearing socks, but she is very glad not to be one of them. And I think reading this at the age that Margaret is in the book, or around that age, was so helpful for me as a young girl, and has been so helpful for generations of young people growing up trying to navigate all of these things, because the book addresses the fact that young people do develop at different speeds. So there is a girl in Margaret's class who is really tall, and she has started to grow boobs, and they all make fun of her and they don't want to be friends with her, and they spread rumours about things that she's probably doing with boys and how grown up she probably is. And it's not poor Laura Danker's fault. You're shamed for looking like a little girl, you're shamed for looking like a teenager, you're shamed for not having started your period, you're shamed for having started your period. Being a preteen girl was exhausting. I am very happy to have gone past that stage of my life, but having books like Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret really helped. These books were a lifesaver, and for me it was this one in particular. And actually, because Judy Blume knows how helpful this book has been for so many readers, a really interesting that happened was there was an update made to this book in the late 80s where Judy Blume rewrote very subtly a scene in which Margaret practices using period products. So in the original book, when it came out in 1970, she uses a sanitary belt, which was actually already kind of on its way out at that point. And so even in the mid to late 70s was quite confusing and quite unfamiliar for a lot of young people. And so Judy Blume actually rewrote that scene and replaced it with a sanitary towel with a pad that most people would be more familiar with. She doesn't change the other 70s references. The book is still very much set in its time period, but that one change was really, really helpful, because what Judy Blume realized was that a lot of girls were getting their information from this book, a lot of young people were actually learning about things that were going to be relevant to them from this book. And so that change was really helpful. And I think that's interesting in the context of there's so many conversations at the moment about rewriting books and whether we should or shouldn't. But this one was for a specific reason. I actually think that my school library must have had an old version, because I do remember being very, very confused and having to ask my mum a lot of questions when I first read it. So I am pro this change. And actually all of this is all the more disheartening in the face of news that we're hearing that various US states have banned this book from being kept in schools because of the discussions around periods, as if young people shouldn't be allowed to learn this stuff from a helpful, familiar, friendly source. So all of those emotions were so familiar from when I was that age, but also Margaret goes through some other more complicated things, for her particularly figuring out what religion she is going to be. So she comes from a family with a Jewish father and a Christian mother, and them getting married caused a lot of conflict in their own families. Margaret's mother was actually disowned by her parents, which is a really, really sad subplot of the story. And so because of all of this conflict that religion caused in their marriage, they have decided not to raise Margaret with any particular religion and to let her decide it for herself when she grows up. And that is something that Margaret thinks about a lot. That is why throughout the book she is talking to God. She doesn't know yet whether it's the Christian God or the Jewish God or another God, but she is really worried about working out which religion she should be. Judy Bloom also does a really good job of painting these complicated family dynamics. It's all seen through the eyes of a child, and so Margaret doesn't spend that much time unpicking these dynamics, but as a slightly older reader, we can see that there is a lot of very complicated tension between Margaret's parents and her grandmother. Margaret absolutely adores her grandmother, but we get the sense that her parents have actually moved the family away from New York to New Jersey in order to get away from Margaret's grandmother, who I think they find slightly overbearing. And we do see that. We see often Margaret's grandmother telling things to Margaret, but then telling her not to tell her parents. Margaret doesn't seem to pick up on that conflict so much, but as a reader, we can see that it's there. We can sympathise with Margaret's mother in particular, as her grandmother is not Margaret's mother, who is trying to control the way that she raises her child. And that's something I'm really excited to see in the movie, because I've heard from early reviews that Margaret's mother is kind of expanded as a character and we get to see a little bit more about her experience. But all of that is actually in the original text, it's in the subtext. And as well as being a book that is so important for so many people, this book is also really, really funny. I really enjoyed my most recent reread of this book. I was laughing out loud at a lot of points here. And I think the book gets funnier the older you are when you reread it. Because, as I've said, Judy Bloom so accurately paints this picture of being 11. She so completely brought that experience back to life for me. And when you're 11, a lot of things feel very, very serious, that in retrospect you were able to see were not that serious and were actually quite funny. So I don't think I noticed quite how witty this book was when I first read it, but as an older reader, it's hilarious. The total seriousness with which Margaret talks about the importance of wearing her loafers with no socks, but then also completely matter-of-factly reels off all of the blisters that she's got and all of the band-aids that she's had to put on them. The letters that she writes to her grandmother detailing so many tiny little pieces of mundane information that as an 11-year-old, you do think that your grandmother wants to know. You do think your grandmother wants to know which of your friends have started their periods. There's her quest for religion, which Margaret is taking very, very seriously. And after visiting both a Christian church and a Jewish temple, she feels like she is on track to learn everything she needs to know about both religions. So far, all she's done is count the different numbers of different coloured hats in the pews. And of course, who can forget the image of Margaret and her group of friends chanting every week, I must increase my bust. I also think something really great about this book is that it doesn't finish with a whole lot of closure, because being a preteen, going into being a teenager does continue to be difficult, so that felt very true to life. Margaret doesn't solve her complicated feelings about religion. Her mother doesn't make up with her own parents. There are a lot of things that Margaret is left still trying to figure out, and I think that made the book particularly resonant for me. I think as a very muddled preteen first reading this book, if it had finished too perfectly tied up, I might not have felt as seen as I did by this book. A very different, iconic and beloved book that I've previously made a book break video about is Bridget Jones, and I talked in that video about how many women across the world will say, I am Bridget Jones. They felt so seen by this book. And I think before that, there's a whole generation of younger girls who would say, I am Margaret. And I'd love to hear from any boys who grew up reading another of Judy Bloom's books, Then Again, Maybe I Won't. That was the book that taught me what wet dreams are. So I wonder if those US states are allowing that book in the school libraries. So hopefully that ramble has gone some way to explaining why I think this book is still so powerful, so beloved, so important, more than 50 years after it first came out, and why I think young people will continue to love this book and learn from this book for another 50 years to come. But you don't just have to take my word for it. I've actually gone and asked just a few of the fans of this book around this company why this book meant so much to them. So let's hear from them.
This is my original copy. When you open it, you can see how many times I've read it because it's actually falling apart.
I read Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret when I was about 12, and I think I got my copy from the library with my mum. I first read Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret when I was 11, and I just started a new school. I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was, but it's a long time ago.
I first read Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret when I was about 10 or 11, and I think, like a lot of readers who are now in their 30s, 40s, I discovered the book in my local library. My gran used to take me to the library and I would scour the shelves looking for books that sounded interesting.
I first read this probably when I was about 10. And my mum's friend had given it to her because she had a daughter that was slightly older than me.
Interestingly, I was brought up in a Christian household, so I'm not entirely sure that my mum or I actually knew what I was about to get into.
And my mum kept it in her wardrobe until she felt I was old enough, but I found it. And when I looked inside and I read some of the things about periods and I must increase my bust, it felt very taboo. And I didn't really know what to make of it, so I put it back. And then when my mum eventually got it out of the cupboard, I had to pretend I'd never seen it before. But she pushed it over the table towards me, really to help me understand about periods and my changing body and growing up.
It's probably the first book I ever read that seemed to be about someone my age in a modern world, and it really, I've never forgotten it. It was such an important book, not just to me, but to all of my friends at the time. We all read it. It was kind of quite revelatory for me. I think it was the first time I'd read a book where I had that access to the innermost thoughts of a teenage girl, and I was a preteen girl at the time.
The bit that really stands out in my mind is the sanitary belt, and I think, like a lot of people, I also picked up an old copy because by that time it had been sort of updated. So that was really intriguing. It kind of, spun off like a series of investigations that my friends and I did to work out what we were going to encounter in the next few years.
It was laying out in front of me some of the things that were about to happen in my life.
I read Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret by Judy Bloom this year because I heard the exciting news about the movie and I wanted to understand what this book was about, and I hope I did.
I first read Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret as an adult, which I found quite an interesting experience because it really just took me right back to kind of being that age. It felt really true to life.
It's really, really funny. That was the main thing that I kind of got from it.
I didn't realise at the time quite how funny it is. It's hilarious. It's so wise and funny.
She tackles family stories and serious things, but in a really fun way, and I just laughed my whole way through.
I guess the other experience of reading the book for me was growing up in a Christian household, was like the God bit. And what I really loved about Margaret's relationship with God was how simple it was and how it was just really almost thinking of it in a different way as a sort of safe space to put your thoughts and put your fears. And I think that was quite comforting as an idea as a sort of preteen or teenage girl.
The book and film capture that sense of, I suppose, like mortifying self-awareness that you have at that age that's also kind of exciting, because you know that you're on the cusp of the rest of your life, really. And Judy Bloom captures that in a way that I think no other author for children and teens has done before or since.
And at the end, I remember just crying buckets. You know, that lovely little prayer at the end, something like, I know you wouldn't have missed this for anything. Thank you, God. Thanks an awful lot.
I would really recommend reading any Judy Bloom book, but Are You There, God is a perfect place to start, because it's just a romp from start to finish.
There should be new fans of this book, all ages.
It's actually led to a conversation I've had with my own daughter, who's 8, about periods. And it just feels incredible that that conversation that my mum and I had, I'm now having with my daughter within the context of Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret. It's a really incredible book.
I would love to hear from you in the comments below if you loved this book as well and why it means so much to you. And I will link here to the video I mentioned on Bridget Jones, as well as a playlist of videos about other books that make us feel nostalgic. So do click through on either of those, and I'll see you next time.